Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Munoz and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, welcome to this week's podcast. We've had a great chat this week with Felipe Munoz from JATO Dynamics, which was a conversation you and I were both looking forward to, weren't we, Phil?
We were, yeah. I mean, his knowledge of the global OEM sector is fantastic, and very well versed on the market in general. But we do love his LinkedIn updates, don't we? Because it's fantastic visuals.
We do, and we do urge anyone listening, if you're not connected to LinkedIn with Felipe Munoz, you need to, because he posts on a regular basis, and what he puts out is such high value, because there's always a really good graphic, and there's some good data and some brilliant insight across global markets. So our conversation with him, which is a standalone episode, should be in your podcast feed. We talked about global car sales. We talked about the on-off car tariffs from the US. I can't remember if
depending when you're listening.
We also talked about Tesla. Went into quite a bit of detail about Tesla in Europe and what's behind the falling sales. And also the Chinese brands. And we actually asked him which of the Chinese brands he's monitoring particularly closely. So lots of insight in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think he's on 200,000 followers on LinkedIn, I think.
He is,
number. So, we're a little bit behind him. But you'll see why. If you don't follow him, we'll put a link to his LinkedIn profile on the newsletter on Monday. But be ready to be your mind be blown by some of his very detailed visuals, because he was in digital marketing as well as part of his role as well, and you will see why. But also this week we've been joined by Stephen Whitton after the midway break from March's Menable moment on how dealers can build well-being into what has traditionally been a coin-operated business approach. So really looking forward to listening to that one at the halfway break.
And final shout out is for Motor Trade News, which is a publication. Well, it's not a publication, it's a website. It's a website that features fairly regularly on the podcast. We do look at Motor Trade News for headlines, but they're actually under new ownership. They've been acquired by Astor Media. And as a result of that, they're posting a lot more stories than they were before. So if Motor Trade News are not on your radar, you probably want to just check them out and add them to your favourites list, because they're now posting, as I say, at least several stories a day. And it's all good quality stuff. So, big shout out there to Motor Trade News.
Yeah, I suspect we'll get more coverage and news links to that as we go forward.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
So before this week's headlines, and we're going to share a quick extract from our chat with Felipe Munoz, who's the top industry analyst. And I must say, I have not copied a link, a snippet from my questions, because there's a slight audio issue with my system during that interview. So I do apologise for that, whoever has listened to the full interview. But we'll listen to the headlines after this short snippet.
Well, look, last year, according to the research I've done, getting information from each car maker, and in case there isn't some estimations, there were around 91 million light vehicles sold last year, which is almost 2% more than in 2023. So basically, we're starting with a good result considering the challenges the industry is facing. But when you look at the detail by car maker, it's clear that the growth was driven by the Chinese car makers. So what we're seeing, especially since 2023, is that China is shaking the global markets and is accelerating expansion globally. And of course, this is having an impact on the traditional car makers, what I call the legacy car makers, around the world. Their position is not as safe as it used to be, because the Chinese are really coming up with very interesting competitive cars, and they are, of course, grabbing the attention of many consumers around the world. So basically, yes, the growth we saw last year is mainly because of the Chinese car makers. So just to give you an example, something which was interesting to see was the BYD, for example. BYD is now the world's seventh biggest car maker in terms of volume, sales volume. And it was the 10th in 2023. So it climbed some positions. It outsold other big car makers such as Honda, Nissan, and Suzuki, for example. And now it's the seventh in terms. And when we're talking of electric vehicles, BYD is the second one behind Tesla, pure electric, I mean. So, and BYD is just one example. Then you have Geely, you have Chery, many other Chinese car makers that are really driving sales up in the world. That's pretty much a summary of what happened last year. Of course, there are winners and losers. Generally speaking, the European car makers saw big drops or are not living their best times right now. But and the Americans as well. I mean, the traditional Americans, because we need to differentiate between the three big from Detroit and Tesla. And the Japanese, of course, lagging behind in terms of electric cars, but still leading the market. Toyota is still the biggest by far, and its electric cars made up just 1.3% of its global sales. So that's also the other side of the story, because on one side we have the Chinese gaining traction because of the electrics, but on the other side, the leader continues to be Toyota, and Toyota barely sells electric cars. So it's interesting. This is fascinating. This is a fascinating industry. We're always seeing changes, especially now under the Trump administration. Everything is changing, but that's pretty much what happened last year.
So as I say there, the snippet shared was based on the global OEM 2024 report that Philippe and JATO published, which that was just kind of a bit of the detail behind how they saw 2024 from an OEM perspective, wasn't it, in the global market.
Yeah, and that was really the sort of introduction to our conversation, and from there, we did really travel across the world, didn't we?
We did.
North, South America, Asia, and Europe, and closer to home, you did have some observations on what's happening in the UK right now. So that episode, as we said, went out last week, and it is in your podcast feed. So do check it out.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. If you're a supplier and would like us to profile your business and reach our audience of dealer bosses, managers and decision makers on one of our dedicated supplier specials episodes, get in touch with Curtis and Philip at motortraderadio@yahoo.com.
Headlines this week come from Car Dealer, the Financial Times, The Times, and Motor Trade News. Starting with, in the first half, we'll look at the FCA's confirmation this week that it's looking at a redress scheme for motor finance customers missold under discretionary commission arrangements. And for redress, I think we can read compensation. The UK government confirms it is looking at ways to relax the ZEV mandate following some tough conversations in Japan with Nissan. Then in the second half, we'll look at how test drives and follow-up calls are lifting customer satisfaction. West Sussex-based dealer group Harwoods posts an £11.8 million loss in its full-year results, and Northvolt, Europe's troubled battery maker, files for bankruptcy.
So as Curtis said there, we're heading over to car dealer first on the latest from the FCA, and this was breaking news this week and basically got covered across all the automotive media and obviously the nationals. But this is the FCA doubles down on redress scheme if customers have lost out in motor finance scandal. And this is saying that the FCA has previously said a redress scheme was on the table. The watchdog has now reiterated this ahead of the Supreme Court hearing, which we know starts on the 1st of April, and saying that a redress scheme would see finance firms paying out compensation. So this is kind of getting quite complicated now for the sector, isn't it? Because we've got the DCA, which started before the High Court, subsequently now into the Supreme Court on the 1st of April. But this is all about this redress, this compensation, and how this is potentially going to be handled once the decision has been made.
Yeah, there's so many twists and turns in this one, but the FCA have come out with this, saying that they are looking at a redress scheme, and this is also pretty much their final word on it now, because they will now wait for the Supreme Court hearing next month, and then they will announce what they're doing in 6 weeks after that. So they've kind of set out the timeline. But I think because they're actually talking about a redress scheme, I think that actually means that the mechanisms are being put in place behind the scenes, and there's probably formulas being worked out. And certainly Martin Lewis, from Money Saving Expert, got very excited about this this week, because he was saying that, and this isn't in the car dealer coverage, this was from the Mail. He was saying that under a redress scheme, individual customers won't need to put in individual complaints. Because what the FCA is doing is it'll make lenders contact everyone who has been missold under the criteria and then pay them based on a formula which pretty much the FCA will present to them. So I think that's where we are at the moment. Whether or not there's any more updates on this before the Supreme Court case is anyone's guess, really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you said before, it's saying that it does not plan to make any further announcement in May that was previously stated, but will confirm its position within 6 weeks of the Supreme Court's decision. If we are proposing a redress scheme, and if so, how we will take it forward, as they've been quoted, and saying that the Supreme Court decision will also inform that what the FCA's next steps will be on the non-discretionary commission arrangements, and that the position on the appeal to the Court of Appeal from the High Court decision is not yet known, and that this will likely be heard on the 8th of December 2025. So it's starting to now accelerate. We covered the story last week, didn't we, about the increased claims around missold finance agreements and things like that, that was reported in the Financial Times last week. So this is certainly now starting to accelerate as we get towards that date. And obviously the FCA, as you said, Curtis, there's probably a lot of activity behind the scenes in preparation for this.
Yeah, and you did touch on non-DCAs as well as DCAs, and we'll know more again after the Supreme Court case and how non-DCAs will be treated. So this one will rumble on for a little while yet.
It will, and we can't get away from the topic of the ZEV mandate, and that's in the news this week in the Times. The UK to relax emission mandate after Nissan warning, saying that the car makers said ZEV targets put manufacturing at its Sunderland plant at risk. So this is a conversation that, as you said before, that Jonathan Reynolds, who's the business secretary, has had, and told at the Times after a meeting with Nissan that a substantial change of policy is being, that's the quote, had been agreed, and added that we will do everything we can to make sure Nissan has that secure long-term future in the UK, making sure that the business and regulatory environment reflects that. So this is a big, big statement that's been made there from that meeting with Nissan, hasn't it?
Yeah, and this story, it wasn't exclusive in the Times, that was picked up by other publications, but the Times were with Jonathan Reynolds in Japan when he was having those talks with Nissan. Now, he does, as you say that there's going to be a substantial change of policy. We don't know what it is yet. That's to be released. But Jonathan Reynolds is quite interesting in his own right, because he grew up in the Sunderland area, so he knows how big and how important Nissan is as an employer in the area there. So there's a further quote from him saying the whole government is absolutely of the view that you will not get to the progress around net zero and energy transition that we want to see by closing down British jobs and British industry. So clearly highlighting the potential dangers there of losing Sunderland. So this is going to be welcomed by the industry, isn't it? Because as we know, the ZEV mandate's been ratcheted up to 28% of all sales in 2025 from 22% last year, which was underachieved. And certainly, we're monitoring sales on a monthly basis, and they're well and truly below 28% in January and February. So I think this will be really widely welcomed by the industry.
I think it is, and it's interesting how it's come very quickly after the closure on the 18th of February of the ZEV Mandate consultation input. But it's odd how this has been, he's been talking about this, but nothing's been communicated publicly from the government, has it, on the any potential changes to the ZEV mandate. But in here, it does say that Reynolds declined to go into detail of the changes of the ZEV mandate, but in a meeting in Tokyo on Wednesday of this week, said that nothing is off the table. And the areas of reform include so-called flexibilities, whereby companies such as Nissan that are short of the EV target can earn credits by reducing the emissions of fuel-burning cars they sell and borrow credits from future years. That's already kind of happening, isn't it? I think the buying and selling of credits and borrowing from future. But obviously then he goes into talking about hybrid vehicles and other technologies that generate carbon emission on a reduced scale could also be taken into account in the assessing the achievement of car makers in meeting government goals. So this is kind of, even though he hasn't announced anything in detail, it's gone into quite a bit of potentials there, haven't they?
Yeah, and the story in the Times actually does talk about a report that it ran last month where Nissan called for a 2-year moratorium in which the ZEV mandate scheme just monitors electric vehicle sales but does not impose penalties. So lots of carrot, no stick. So that probably won't resonate with government, but I think what this story is telling us is that there is a compromise being thrashed out here, and hopefully we're going to hear about that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, the sooner the better to get some clarity and some focus this year, just to accelerate the market. But we'll be back with the rest of this week's headlines after this month's Men-Able Moments with Stephen Whitton.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are, and on your podcast feed. Next up is our latest Men-Able moment, looking at mental wealth and well-being awareness and best practice in the automotive sector. With me, Stephen Whitton. Yeah, hi everyone, it's Men-Able Moments time. Hope you're well, and if you are heavily involved in the mad rush that is March, then that's working out well for you, and it's helping you to achieve all of your goals and objectives. And either way, whether you're involved in it or not, whether you sell used new cars or not, the subject this week is about fanning the flames of the right people. And this fits really well in our industry, which, for as long as I've known it, has always been about performance, hitting targets, achieving results, and to some extent has been a little bit coin operated. And we sort of think that people around us are just purely motivated by money, or certainly was back in the day when I was involved in it heavily at the front end. So what I want to do is just spend a few minutes talking about how do we fan the flames of the right people around our business against the backdrop, as I say, of what is a very performance-driven month. So tip number one really is about identifying your key players, and look out for those who go the extra mile, show potential for leadership and consistently deliver results. But there will also be other people that recognise problems and are able to adapt and change and deal with challenges and can solve those problems. The two are not mutually exclusive, but they're good things to look out for. Fueling people's growth is critical, and I often get told that one of the reasons people disengage is they don't feel they have the opportunity to grow and develop in the business. So offer ongoing training in sales, service, and particularly in leadership and communication. Now, we often think we're good at communicating, and then we get feedback from people and we realise that actually there's some work to be done there. Provide some mentorship opportunities, and mentoring can come in all shapes and sizes from all sorts of areas. So look closely at that. And of course, encourage certifications and professional recognition for technicians and sales teams alike, whatever it might be. In recognising and rewarding people, I've already touched on that we have had a tendency to be a bit coin operated, and it's right that we have bonuses and commission structures and all of that stuff around achieving results and special perks and all of that sort of thing. But it's about implementing that and making sure that everyone feels that you can celebrate the wins across the piece, and regardless of how you're measuring good in the old-fashioned term. So let's celebrate those wins publicly, and whether that's hitting targets or it's about outstanding customer service, think about what rewards and recognition there is in place around that. That leads nicely on to creating a culture of ownership. And the more I get out there and I'm working with lots of organisations and dealers and so on, I'm realising now that it's really about getting everyone involved and empowering them to feed into this culture of ownership, involving them in process improvements and dealership strategy. And it's absolutely critical. In keeping the energy high, fostering a team-oriented environment with friendly competition really does work quite well. And using team building activities and challenges keeps the morale going. But a key bit in all of that is ensuring that managers lead with enthusiasm and positivity. And as I've said before, that leaders have courage. And that's the courage to have those conversations, particularly around well-being, that we weren't having before. Now, we are all, as human beings, prone to what I call comparisonitis. We look across and the person across from us or in the other part of the building seems to be doing better than us. And in that area of keeping the energy high and recognizing good potential and good people, fanning their flames makes sure that we get everyone involved in owning the culture in that business. So provide some clear paths as well. Show employees how they can grow within the company and offer promotions and incentives and whatever's possible and whatever is appropriate. But a key bit in all of this is listening and adapting, getting feedback on what motivates your team. And you might be surprised, because I thought I used to be motivated by money and was coin operated, but the reality is it's not that anymore. And more people I'm seeing are coming into the workplace wanting to know that the organisation looks after their well-being. And when they feel loyal, you get reliability and you get good, strong people. So maybe it's time to step back and think about how we're measuring what good looks like. So just a few thoughts there about keeping your people engaged, motivated and invested in your business for the long haul. And if you want to dive deep into any of those areas, then as always, you know how to get hold of me, stephen.whitton@menable.org. But there is a bit of a caveat on all of this, and it's a footnote that says, examine closely how you're measuring your best people. I always remember fondly that best sales exec was measured based on the number of units they put out, but behind them was a trail of destruction around customer service and poor part exchange appraisals and you just think, we're just measuring on that one parameter and everything else is an absolute mess. So again, it's about looking at that in the round and making sure it's balanced. And of course, making sure that we don't focus too heavily on one area and overlook another. Very quickly, just want to give a quick shout out to Laura Coase at the ALN, the Automotive Leaders Network. I joined that last week and it was amazing to be in the same room as so many people from across the industry. It was just awesome. And to the CEO, and you know who you are, who came up to me and said that they listen to this podcast every week and particularly enjoy the Men-Able moments. A very big hi, and I hope you're having a fantastic weekend. And I look forward to hearing you on this podcast again soon. Anyway, enough for that for now, and we will see you again soon. Take care. Bye.
I bet you're quietly trying to guess who that is.
Yeah, I am. and he hasn't told us, has he?
He hasn't. I could take a guess because I kind of know who. But there was, I don't know the people that go to the event, but it could be anybody because we've had quite a few CEOs on over the years, haven't we? So we won't call out because it's not the right thing to do. But some poignant things there, sort of highlighting how the industry's changed and how consumer employee priorities have changed as well, which is key, isn't it? That not everybody is driven, motivated by money, which is a key point.
Totally agree, and I loved his expression because he's invented a word, comparisonitis. I think that will resonate with a lot of listeners. I mean, it certainly does with me.
It's on the doctor's list, that one,
yeah. And as Stephen says, you can contact him at menable.org online, or you can email him at stephen.whitton@menable.org, and it's Stephen with a PH, and he's on LinkedIn as well. So if you do want to learn more about Stephen's approach to well-being in the motor trade, then reach out to him and have a conversation. And in fact, Stephen's Men-Able moment actually leads in nicely with the next story, which is from Motor Trade News, and it's almost as though we planned it this way.
Who did that?
Yeah, I know. And the headline there is test drives and follow-ups boost dealer customer satisfaction, research finds. So this is research from JudgeService, and I did work with Neil and the team on this particular story, and I did see the research, and it's a big piece of research because what they've done is they've analysed 436,000 customer questionnaires, and it's looking at what's driving the biggest increases in net promoter scores. And it found that the biggest increase in satisfaction scores is driven by test drives. So offering a test drive during the sales process or customers coming into a dealership, And actually proactively offering the test drive means you're more likely to engage with that customer, and they're more likely to recommend you to family, friends on social media, because what they found was that customers who weren't offered a test drive ranked at 45%, but as soon as they were offered a test drive, that went up to 81% in terms of net promoters. So it's an easy win, and it is something that maybe isn't followed through as regularly as it should be. And the research also found that customers appreciate dealers getting in touch after they've bought a car. And this really follows on from what Stephen was saying. It's not just the selling of the car, it's everything else that goes with it. And those follow-up calls, just to make sure everything's okay with the car and addressing any issues that may have presented since the customer had taken delivery, those satisfaction levels rise from 41% to 87% for those that do. So again, it's another easy win, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. There'll be people listening to the podcast this morning thinking, well, that's basics. This is all necessarily what Pendle in the early days. You didn't get anything without the test drive. The first thing was to get let's say they use the phrase bums in seats. About that's the thing. It's getting them in the car, getting them experience, and then they want it. It's that building that desirability. At the same time, as you start to build relationship with the customer whilst you're out on test drive with them. I mean, that was my upbringing, should I say, Curtis, on that one. But yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean, this is pure data that is demonstrating it works. It's what consumers want. They want to test drive the car, and they want you to follow them up. After to give them an opportunity to discuss further details. And, I think that it's fascinating. And there's a quote in here from Neil Adley, who's the managing director at JudgeService, saying that their net promoter research reveals the positive impact of consistently delivering sales process that acknowledges some of the fundamental expectations of customers. Test drives sell cars. They always have done, and they always will do. Sales staff who do not consistently introduce them as part of their sales conversation will prompt who do not constantly introduce them as part of their sales conversations will prompt customers to shop elsewhere. And that post-COVID, some salespeople had got used to unaccompanied test drives, and this caused a bit of a malice in the sales process. So again, we went through that COVID period, didn't we, where you couldn't test drive customers in the first instance, and then it was kind of let the customers go out on their own, which you lose in that relationship with the customer by not being with them in the car as well. So I think it's great advice and great data that backs it up.
Yeah, definitely. So next up is a story from Car Dealer, and the headline there is luxury car dealer group Harwoods swings to devastating £11.8 million loss. So this is Harwoods, a family-owned group based in the south. I know them. They're in my part of the world. They represent the likes of Volvo, JLR, BMW Mini, as well as some of the more upmarket brands like Aston Martin, Bentley, and McLaren. So this particular story looks at the full year for 2023, and that's the key to the story, because like so many of the recent year ends that we've covered on the podcast, those 2022 to 2023 comparisons have been unfavourable, because 2022 was such a strong year, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, and I think it's quite late in the year so far getting the full year 2023 trading update. But as you said there, if you remember back to some of these that we described earlier, covering those 2023 performances, it was significantly down, because 2022, as you say there, Curtis, was such a strong year for the sector in terms of profitability in both the new and the used market, as valuations went up rather than down on used cars, and supply was heavily constrained, resulting in strong margins. So as you say there, when you're doing a comparable for 22 versus 2023, versus 22 versus 2023, it is challenging. But obviously, they are saying that the group is predicting it will make another loss in 2024, albeit at a slightly smaller level, and then return to profitability in 2025. So, they're not the first one to post quite heavy losses in 2023. And 2024 was still a fairly challenging year at the start of the year there. So, I think positively they're obviously saying that there is a turnaround, and they are looking forward to this year. And there is a statement in the release there from Archie Harwood, who's the CEO, saying that 2023 was a challenging year for the industry and the group, where vehicle margins deteriorated throughout the year, as well as increased interest rate costs and stocking charges. The preceding post-COVID period of tight supply led to a combination of relaxed stocking policies, unusual specifications, and inflated prices. So really just reiterating what we've talked about with a lot of those sort of financial periods for 2023 there, about the challenges felt in 2022 versus the prior year. So I think it's probably going to be one of the last financial updates for 2023 trading, I suspect. There can't be many left now.
You would think most of them have been published now, and this story that Car Dealer ran was based on submissions to Companies House. And it's probably worth just adding that as a group, it has diversified over the last year or so by taking on BYD, the Chinese brand. So it'd be interesting to see how that fares for the group.
Yeah. And finally, a very quick update, because it's something that we've talked about a few times, and this is on the Financial Times, and that Northvolt files for bankruptcy in Sweden, saying the collapse of the vehicle battery maker deals major blow for Europe's bid to rival China. So this is the battery maker Northvolt. They filed for bankruptcy in Sweden, as I said there, capping the downfall of a company once regarded as Europe's best hope of competing in the industry dominated by China. So it's not great news, this, is it? But I think we knew it was kind of coming, because they have been struggling for a while, haven't they?
Yeah, and I think they went into Chapter 11 in the US at the back end of last year, so it's no big surprise this. And it was a Swedish startup, and it had the backing of Volkswagen Group as well as Goldman Sachs and BlackRock. But last week it said that it was unable to secure financing to continue, and that a court-appointed trustee would sell its assets. So it really is end of the road now for the business. But there was an interesting comment from Tom Johnston, who is Northvolt's interim chair, who said, "This is an incredibly difficult day for everyone at Northvolt. We set out to build something groundbreaking to drive real change in the battery, EV and wider European industry and accelerate the transition to a green and sustainable future." So it's really outlining its sort of bold intentions when it launched, but it really has failed to establish itself and compete successfully with Chinese battery producers.
Yeah, no, as I say, it's a shame. But you say it's sort of November of last year, I think, as you said there, Curtis, filed for Chapter 11 over in the US. So I suppose it was writing on the wall. Unfortunately, we'll see what happens next. But hopefully you found this week's headlines useful and interesting. And as always, head over to the sources themselves, and we'll include the links on Monday's newsletter. I do have a listen to the full interview there with Philippe from JATO. I think you'll find it fascinating, and I'll apologise again for my very poor audio. In fact, I sounded like a 12-year-old heavy smoker. I don't know what was going on with my audio then. But I think great interview there with Philippe. So don't miss out on that. And as always, if you want Stephen Whitton to talk about anything in particular on his Menable moments, then please do reach out to Curtis, myself, or Stephen directly, and we'll include them in the Menable moments.
But that's all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.